All right, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order this session of the Tacoma Park City Council. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Stewart.
Here.
Councilmember Kovar. Councilmember DeBala. Here. Councilmember Costick. Here. Councilmember Siemens.
Present.
Councilmember Smith.
Here.
Councilmember Searcy.
Here.
All right, terrific. Well, this evening is our budget reconciliation work session. This is the night that we go through the items that council has added to our reconciliation list to see what changes we will make to the budget that was proposed by the city manager about a month ago. How we will go through, we'll go through this evening, discuss the items, take hand votes on each of them, and then at the end of the night, review where we stand. If needed, we will come back to this again on Wednesday evening, just if we have any outstanding questions. And then we will have our first vote on our budget the following Wednesday on May 8th. So hopefully tonight we will get through, our goal is to get through the entire list this evening so that our finance department can start putting together the final budget for our vote, and I know they're anxious to do that. We will get started. I passed around to the city council. After talking to some folks, there are some things that it looks like we pretty much have consensus around agreement, and we thought it might be best to go through those items first, and then other items that had more questions or the staff was going to present some more information before we decided on those items. Before we begin going down our list, which I think the deputy city manager is going to pull up for us, are there any just overarching questions that members of the city council have before we get into our reconciliation list? Councilwoman DeBala.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to see about a question I had asked last week that is not on the reconciliation list. It's a question about the costs, both staff and expenses going out for the two positions that are proposed to be increased from part-time to full-time, and whether that information is available tonight or whether we'll get it Wednesday.
I had emailed you a response to that question. I'm not sure if you missed it, but I just pulled it up if you'd like me to resend it or read it.
I was interested in having everybody hear the answer, yeah.
Okay, sure. Let me pull it back up so I have the numbers.
Take it on the screen.
Yeah, that's the problem
Sorry to
with that's
put a snag in it here.
So the question that I believe Councilmember DeBala had was about the cost for adding the second half to two existing half-time positions. One is a landlord-tenant mediator, and the other is a parking enforcement officer position. Essentially the answer is the cost for those positions to bring them from half-time to full-time would be a little less than twice what they are now. So with wages and benefits, a half-time position is about $42,000 in that range. A full-time position with wages and benefits would be a little less than double that. Something that's important to note is that the parking enforcement position that is currently half-time and vacant, and it has been for about 18 months, I believe, maybe a little bit longer. The city has foregone well into the six figures, over $100,000 in revenue with that position being vacant that we would have realized in parking fines from citations that were issued. We have gone out and tried to hire for the position and have had a hard time doing so. And the hiring manager for that position believes it's difficult to find somebody who's interested in a half-time position instead of a full-time position. So that being said, if we are successful in finding somebody for that position when it's full-time, we'll likely realize at least twice as much possibly in revenue. We'll have somebody who's able to enforce parking better in the evening hours, which I believe is where we often issue a lot of citations. So of the two positions, one of them is expected to bring in more revenue, basically more than pay for itself. The other is a totally different type of position. I don't know if the city manager has anything to add.
No, that's it. I think it changes the position from part-time to full-time to meet the needs in housing.
Yeah,
Could I
so,
ask a-
so
oh.
thank you for the answer that,
Sure.
that to go that step is a little less than double, not a little or a lot more than double. Thank you.
Just one follow-up question. So if the parking position is filled and the six figures are, however much it is, are brought in, where does that money go? Is that just in the general fund? Is that? in a
Yes, and
sep-
it's shown to be as expected revenue for the FY '20 budget.
Connected to this, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So we're counting
We are
that
counting on
at the
those
moment.
funds.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Great. Any other overarching questions before we start going through the reconciliation list? Okay, seeing none, we will, so just to give people a sense of the list, what they will be seeing on the screen, and if you're watching at home, this list is also up on the website with our agenda this evening. We will be working in the spreadsheet tonight so that when the deputy city manager makes a change to it, either taking an item away or adding to it, it will change the tax rate. So we can look at it. That's the number that is in the yellow box. Right now, it doesn't make sense. Actually, don't look at it because there are things that are double counted in it. But as we go through, it will change. And you'll see here, just as a point of reference, what the tax rate was for FY19 and the tax rate that would be if we did constant yield plus the ECI rate, which is the employee
Cost
compensation,
index.
cost index, cost index.
And, Mayor, the constant rate, the constant yield rate is 526, 0.526.
0.526. Great. Okay, so the first item we were going to start with was the correction that needed to be made, the decrease in the personnel and the health benefit savings, which was to take out $308,700. Any questions on that? All those in favor of that staying on the reconciliation list, please raise your hand. All right, that item stays on. The next one was the eliminating the council retreat facilitator. Any discussion of that one? All those in favor of keeping that on the reconciliation list, please raise your hand. Okay, that stays on. Next was eliminating the county lobbyist. Any discussion of that? All those in favor of keeping on eliminating the county lobbyist, please raise your hand. That's everyone. Next was reducing the I Can Shine bike camp. Basically, as we talked about this last week, this would keep money in so that we could go for the grant, but if we didn't get the grant, then we would not be moving forward with the program. Any questions on that one? All those in favor of the amount we have left in for the I Can Shine camp, please raise your hand. That's unanimous as well. The next item we were going to look into, we're going to jump down a little bit because we're going to deal with the grants program in a moment, is reducing the contribution to the police pension in excess of the actuarial recommendation. Any discussion of that?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith? Siemens?
Thank you. No, I think that we should keep the excess money in there that we had originally added to above what the actuarial had recommended. I think it's an important plan that we need to continue to support.
Great, thank you. Any other comments on that one? Councilmember Kovar?
I think I'd be willing to support extra money for that if it was part of a formal process where we had looked out over a period of years and said, in this way, given this specific population within the police department, by this year, we hope to reach this. I feel a little bit like this one is more just, it's a nice round number that can maybe be helpful to me, since we do have the recommendation from the actuary and we're within that. That strikes me as more of just something that would be nice to do, but more of a random thing. So I would prefer not to spend that.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on this one? All right, all those in favor of keeping the reduction on the reconciliation list, please raise your hand. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those opposed? And 1 opposed. So that stays on the reconciliation. The next, we're gonna skip down to reducing the commemoration commission plaques. This had been, the request had been $12,000, and we're gonna cut that down to leaving in $4,000 for plaques, which would be any subtraction of $8,000 in their budget. Any question on that? All those in favor of reducing the
I have a
sorry.
quick
Oh,
question.
sorry. I didn't see that.
Yeah, I just wanted to note, I do think I really want to see us move forward with the plaques to commemorate the atrocities that were done by the people who we have streets named after, and I think that has to be a priority. I'm voting in support of keeping the reduction on here just because I don't think we're quite at a point to do that yet. And I want to see a little more community engagement on what those plaques will look like, and have a little more discussion before we get to that point. So I'm hoping we'll have an opportunity with some of these funds to do some of those things, and then moving forward, when we have a better idea about what we are going to do, hopefully we can move forward at that time with some more funding.
Terrific. Any other comments? Okay. All those in favor of reducing the commemoration commission plaques allocation, please raise your hand. And that's unanimous. The next item we had was, we had discussed combining Independence Day and Celebrate Tacoma, and that would result in a $12,000 reduction in our budget. Any discussion of that? Councilmember Siemens?
Yes, Mayor. I attended the Independence Day Committee meeting last week, and I just wanted to note that they haven't really been consulted about this, but they're willing to do that this year, but reluctant to commit to doing it forever until they get a chance to talk with us and determine what it is exactly that we're expecting.
Well, I think it would
If-
not, oh,
Yeah,
sorry, I was gonna
if
say,
I
it
can be
wouldn't be
clear,
this
it would
year.
not be for this July 4th.
Okay.
It would be because Celebrate Tacoma is already taking, we already have a date for it, and it's taking place this May, and 4th of July is already, so it would be over a year to
Right.
plan it.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
great. Any other questions on this one? All right. All those in favor of, maybe I should say, looking into combining the Independence Day and Celebrate Tacoma events for a reduction of $12,000 in our budget, please raise your hand. That's everyone. All right, the next one we were going to talk about is eliminating the council conference room furniture. We had allocated in the budget $5,000 for this. Any questions on that one? Okay, all those in favor of eliminating the council conference room furniture, please raise your hand. And that is everyone. Okay, the next two items I think are reducing public art, and I don't know if the city manager or deputy city manager had any other information they wanted to share on that.
No, the information that we've shared before is that we feel that the public art does a lot to kind of set the tone for Tacoma Park, and it's also considered an economic development tool that helps make this a special place for placemaking. Prefer that you keep it.
Okay. Any questions on this one, or? Councilwoman Searcy.
Thank you. So it was mentioned that public art would be a value to some of the economic development and placemaking activities. Are there any specific ideas that are currently being thought about with staff in terms of what it would entail? Are we talking about art that would be a permanent installation? Are we talking about something that would be a temporary item? I'm just trying to get a better feel for.
Ms. Crispy, address this. It is part of our cultural plan that you've just recently re-upped.
Oops.
Sorry. We are thinking of permanent installations. An example of something in the past would be like the azalea sculpture that Howard Connolly did on Flower Avenue. We have, as you know, looked for a while at the Holton Avenue green space between Holton and University on the west side of New Hampshire as a prime location for something like that. The process would include a call for artists. The Arts and Humanities Commission would probably have a subcommittee that would look at the submissions. So there would be some engagement from the community through that process.
Thank you.
And Ms. Grisby, before you leave, and by taking out the $25,000, that's not the whole budget for public
It's not
art.
the whole budget.
Okay.
We rolled over funds from this year's budget because we didn't have the staff capacity to do it. And so we had bumped up next year's. So I think what that does is drop it down to probably about what it would have been, what this year's was. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you,
So I think the remaining would be, I don't have the number in front of me, but I think it would be little less than 20,000, something between 15 and 20.
so thinking about staff capacity this year in the department, would you say that the funding that would be left if we take out the 25,000 would allow for an installation this year, or no?
For FY19?
Or, no,
Or for FY20?
yeah.
Yes. We could do it, we could do something with the remaining funds.
I'm also wondering, how does this interact with the neighborhood commercial area developments? Could public art be potentially a part of those improvements?
It certainly could. Those improvements also can include other things, and I know my colleague Samira Cook-Gaines is prepared to speak to that.
Okay, if she goes ahead.
Oh, yes, sorry, yeah.
Did you want to, okay. Well, specifically, those funds are, and they're a higher dollar amount because we're talking about actual installations, improvements to places, buildings, et cetera. So we're talking about things that will last longer. These are not kind of one-hit things that'll disappear in a year. We're talking about things like grants for facade improvement, placemaking, which sounds a little bit of a fuzzy word, but in placemaking, what we really mean is making commercial spaces that include public spaces. So what that does is attract the public to the commercial districts. So the nicer, the prettier, the more inviting that these spaces are, the better those businesses will do. And normally those projects are a higher dollar value. So public art is a part of that, and we would try to leverage funds and make those things happen all, in concert. But they're extremely important for certain areas. My colleague mentioned Holton Lane. I would love to draw attention to the Ethan Allen Avenue and New Hampshire corridor. There's, there's workers, day laborers that kind of gather in that space, making that more of a public space that's more inviting. And right now it just looks like the corner of a highway. So there are ways that we can use those funds to draw better and more attention to our commercial districts.
Thank you. Councilwoman DeBala?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the reason this wound up on the list was because it was one of the few things that was rated a category 4 as opposed to a 1, 2, or 3 in the capital budget. And rather than eliminate it, because we did just adopt a cultural plan, that's why I proposed not to eliminate it, but to reduce it in an effort to get the overall total down.
Great. Any other questions or on this one? All right. All those in favor of reducing the public art budget by $25,000, please raise your hand. 1, 2, is your hand up? All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it passes. All right, that stays in. Next, we have another one that I think maybe some questions on, reducing the folk festival funding. This was put on the list to reduce the folk festival funding. It's $20,000 is budgeted now. It was put on the list to reduce that by $10,000. We did receive, I give all my colleagues a moment to review, if they have not yet reviewed the comments from the Folk Festival committee in terms of what that would mean for them if we did cut their budget. Any questions on this one or comments?
If I can
Yeah.
summarize the comments,
Thank
it
you.
was that, that they feel very strongly that it would be very hard to lose $10,000, that if something had to be lowered, lowering it by 2,500 was about as much as they would be able to kind of handle at one time, given kind of the late time that this is coming in their budget questions for their planning. So that was the message that they sent.
Councilmember Culver?
Yeah, to me, I'd like to keep it, we had hit this situation where the program didn't go forward 1 year, and I think a real effort was made within the community and by us to make sure that it would be back on in the 40th year, I believe is what it was. So and that was just, I think, within the last year. So I don't favor now stepping back from that. I'd like to keep the full amount.
Councilmember Searcy?
I know that I proposed cutting this back, and cognizant of the fact that it takes time to plan these types of events and don't want to put the current work group at a disadvantage. So I still would propose a cut, but I would be willing to propose a cut at the level in which the committee would be able to continue to proceed with the Folk Festival for this year.
That was 25,
The
that's
the 2,500.
the 2,500.
The $2,500 cut. Okay.
Yeah, my computer just died. I was like, I thought it was like 15.
Is it? I don't know.
It said, ideally, we request that the amount granted not go lower than $15,000 due to increased costs, and that the amount be lowered over 2 years in increments
Right.
of $2,500.
Right, so,
Right, so that's why I said the 2,500, that was
Yeah.
about the most that they felt that they could take the hit this year.
so we'll reduce the reconciliation item to taking out 2,500 instead of 10,000. Is everyone okay with that? Okay. All right. Well, I just want to know if everyone's okay. Yeah, just the change. And then if anybody has any additional questions, yeah, no, it's fine. If anyone, because since Councilwoman Searcy added this to the list, now she's just amending the item. Any other questions on this one? Okay. All those in favor of continuing to have on the reconciliation list a reduction in the Folk Festival funding of $2,500, please raise your hand. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that stays on. All right. Now the next thing we're going to do is now I grouped the items that were similar. So the first is our grants program. Councilmember Siemens had put on to eliminate the community grants program, and you want to speak to that? Yeah.
I appreciate that, Mayor. I had the pleasure of speaking with Grace Wiggins earlier this week, or last week, and had a very nice, long discussion with her about the grant programs and my concerns that I've had over the past couple of years with the grants and the whole process, and I was pleased to learn that there are many changes that have been made and are in progress, and they're in every case resolving the issues, or aim to resolve the issues that I had, and so I no longer feel compelled to kill this program, but would like to give these grants are so important, I think, to the community, and I have advocated for them in the past, and I now feel that my past concerns are being addressed and moving forward. So I strongly support the community grants program and would like to drop this elimination request.
Okay, we
And
will,
And I also, we'll talk about that later. There'll be another
okay.
opportunity to talk about the community grants later.
No, we're gonna do it now. We're doing everything together. So, we're dropping the eliminating the community grants program. And then there was another item to increase the community grants funding. So what is in the proposed budget right now is $60,000. That's the same funding level that was last year's. The city we cut from, during our reconciliation list this time last year, the grants from 80,000 to 60,000. And there's a proposal on the table from Councilmember Smith to put it back up to the 2018 level at $80,000. And Councilmember Siemens?
Thank you. I also had the opportunity to talk with Councilmember Smith about his request, and that combined with the discussion I had with Ms. Wiggins, I would strongly support this and encourage my colleagues to support this. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Searcy? Sorry. Yeah, we're talking about the increase, yeah. Councilmember Searcy?
I also had an opportunity to talk to Grace Wiggins, and I know the process in terms of getting the review panels together and solicitations have already gone out for this program, so I too would support the increase.
Okay. Any other comments or anything? All right, then all those in favor of increasing the community grants program back to its, I guess, FY 2018 level of 80,000, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's an addition of 20,000 on increasing the community grants. Okay. Next, we'll look at the two items that are regarding reducing attendance at conferences. One was a proposal to reduce the council budget for attendance at conferences, and the other was to reduce staff conferences. First, we'll look at the reduction in council conferences. What is budgeted is $30,000, and we're requesting, or whoever put this on is requesting a $10,000 reduction. Councilmember Smith.
I just want to ask staff, how will that directly impact the conferences that council members attend?
Fewer of you will be able to attend conferences.
But which ones? I mean, is it,
It's up to you to decide who gets to go
okay.
to whichever conferences. You'd have to come up with a process of figuring that out. What we've budgeted for is what you're kind of been likely to go to.
In the last couple of years.
That's right.
Correct, yes. If people remember, the city clerk asked us to make sure that we turned in this year when they were doing the budget, all the conferences that we've looked at, so. Councilmember Kovar?
Yeah, I was one of the people who had talked about doing this, reducing it by 10,000 both for the staff and for the council, and I just think that in a time when we're looking for savings, it's nice, I've found them valuable, but I also think that we could probably coordinate and among ourselves figure out who could attend which, so I would favor doing the reduction.
Councilwoman DeBala?
Yeah, just a question. Last year, we had 30,000, we had less.
I believe we had
Last year.
27,000 last year.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There has been an increase in council members going to conferences.
Mhm.
And that's admirable, but I'm also willing to coordinate if that's what we need to do.
All right. All right, so we'll take that one we're talking about now is reducing council conferences. All those in favor of reducing council conferences by $10,000, please raise your hand. That's 6 out of 7, so that stays. Next is reducing staff conferences by $10,000. And I will speak to this one. On this one, I think we've asked staff this year to really cut their budgets. Many of them have cut interns or half their interns. We don't have a large staff. Our sustainability manager is like the sustainability manager. I think our staff sometimes benefits a great deal from going to conferences, meeting with colleagues in other cities, larger cities. In addition, I know from just speaking with the staff and hearing about their presentations at other conferences, how beneficial that is to us. So I think this, the technical skills they learn, the connections that they're also making are a benefit, and that comes back to the city manyfold. So I would actually like to keep the budgeted amount for staff conferences. Councilwoman Costick.
I want to echo the mayor's comments. I think it's really important that our staff continue to attend conferences and have opportunities to connect with people who work in other cities, to learn from what they're doing, as well as share what we're doing here in Tacoma Park. And for us just to have those opportunities to, step outside of the box occasionally, step outside of Tacoma Park and think more broadly and come back and bring what you've learned back to the city. Thank you.
Councilwoman Searcy.
I hate to bring up a new question. But does this account for all staff? Like, is there a budgeted amount of trainings, dollars that are allocated per staff? Or is it a subset? Like, does this include public works? I'm just trying to get a feel on average, what's the total amount that each individual staff person might receive for training?
So it does depend on positions. So many of our part-time staff or our labor staff do not go to conferences. It's more professional staff that go to, a national recreation conference or national public works association conference, that kind of thing. I know we had, for example, very interesting comments on one of our staff persons going to a conference about solid waste that talked about our composting and a lot of shared information on that. We generally, it's not like a set dollar amount, it's more which conferences you need to go to. And so for the higher level professional staff, there's often a national conference that they attend a year, or if there's several people in that same profession, they alternate, so it's rotated. As the mayor mentioned, when you've just got one engineer or one arborist or whatever, you can't learn from your colleagues in the same way and take turns in the same way, so we budget for one. Then there certainly is training that we do on-site for all departments and all different staff at all different levels, or there might be regional things that we go to that are pretty low budget.
And this doesn't include travel for those?
This includes travel.
It includes travel,
Yeah.
okay,
If travel is needed, it's included.
okay.
And then for that reason, it sometimes really varies depending on where the conference is for each year.
Right. Thank you.
Councilman McCovar.
Yeah, I just want to say again, I think it's very valuable to attend, but I just think that there are times when economizing makes sense. We're talking about just a little over about a 10% reduction. And again, I think with coordination, we could continue to allow a significant number of staff to benefit from these kinds of professional exchanges while saving some money. So that's what I would prefer. Thanks.
Great. All right, all those in favor in keeping this reduction in the staff conferences on the reconciliation list, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so that stays on the list. Okay, next we have a couple of items where we did have some questions last week. One was on the public land management plan implementation, and we did get some information late this afternoon regarding that. I don't know if the city manager wants to speak to that.
Certainly. The $25,000, some folks had wondered if, was this for a consultant to do planning for this? It is not. It is for the technical kinds of studies that we might do on a particular site. If a parcel might come available for use as a little playground or whatever, we may need to do environmental testing or do a survey. Those usually cost, in like $4,000 or sometimes more just for those small things. If it's a larger parcel, they could be quite expensive. There's a number of sites that we think, will be coming up as we've been pursuing a number of different initiatives. So this would be money that's available for us to do those kinds of things. It's important to have it in here, particularly If there's an issue about a parcel, it might need a real fast turnaround time. It may be a time when you're on recess, or that there's not enough time to kind of come through and find a budget amendment to accommodate it. So that's why it's very useful to have that as a set-aside area of money.
Okay. Councilmember Kovar, is there?
No,
I
I didn't mean to, sorry.
Okay. Councilman Costick?
It's my understanding that this, the public land management plan is also looking at just where public land is located in the city and planning for kind of the distribution of that. Is that part of the 25,000 as well, or is that a separate
That's staff time.
portion?
That's just staff time.
Okay, okay.
Councilman DeBala?
Yeah, two things. One, just a reminder that the reason this wound up on the list was because, again, it was, on a scale of 1 to 4, it was one of the few that was rated a 4. Not to say that it's not important, but relatively speaking, it was ranked less important. My question is, how have we been doing this up until now?
Sometimes we've had some funds for different kinds of surveys, or if we know a particular project is coming up, but it's been haphazard. And particularly with the inquiries about lack of parks in wards 4 and 5 and 6, for example, looking at these different sites, it's a question that's been raised more often, so that's why we were thinking of it in a more comprehensive way.
Councilwoman Searcy? Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. And is there a way to do that anyway, if it comes up?
No, we have cut the budget so tight
And
through
so
our
coming to
departments.
us on when something comes up, that's
I mean,
not
yes, we can
recommend-
come to you, and if there happens to be
recommended.
savings from something as you go through the year, you could make a change. I think we did remarkable cuts to get to the point of the proposed budget, and when I didn't put something forward, it's because I felt we needed those funds. And it was, I think, because we had cut in so many different areas, that this is an area that we felt some funds would be useful.
Councilwoman Searcy?
So there was $25,000, I believe, allocated for this implementation during the last fiscal year. And so has that been used at all for the purpose that's being described right now?
I
think
don't
I'm
know, I don't
getting-
think so. And I think that was something a little different.
Yeah, that's the issue. I'm getting
Yeah.
confused because I was under the impression what was presented to us previously was that we would have a public space management plan that would be finalized, that the resources that were allocated previously would be used for perhaps filling in those gaps. And now I'm kind of hearing that it's kind of about filling in those gaps, but it's also about having funds available to do surveys, which is new.
Or different kinds of testing.
Right,
or-
which
yeah.
is, it's something new that this is the first time I'm hearing something like that. Now, again, I'm perfectly fine with being corrected, but I do know that this is something that has been in the budget for, my understanding, a couple of cycles now, and we still don't have a plan, and this is the first time I'm hearing about using it for surveys.
Okay. I think there have been changes over time as we had the staff changes. I feel more comfortable about it right now, but I can't quite address what it was supposed to do last year.
Okay, thank you.
I have one final question.
I was like, I feel like I have a question
Yeah.
too.
Do you think that there is staff time available to be able to do this sort of thing this year? I know there's a lot going on in HCD. You're busy with a lot of different things, and it seems like that's one of the reasons why this project hasn't moved forward more in the past. Does it feel like this is a year when it could happen or not?
Yes, we are on track. We expect to be in front of council probably sometime this summer with an initial framework, and then have community engagement processes in the fall and be back in front of council maybe next winter. So our aim is to have this done by the end of FY20, but our calendar plan actually is to have it done sooner than that.
There's been actually a lot of work on it in the last few months. Since there has been more staff in HCD, they have been functioning pretty well on this plan, and I would like to see that before you.
If I may say also, some of the money set aside this year was really for community engagement, public meetings, that kind of thing. And so that is covered elsewhere in the budget in terms of printing materials, maps for public meetings and things like that for the FY20 budget.
So I don't mean to make anyone repeat themselves, but I don't feel like I'm really grasping exactly what these funds would be used for. Can you just give an example of a situation where having these funds would enable us to do something, and what exactly that would be,
Sure.
and what the circumstances would be?
Yeah, I can look at properties the city has currently owned. For instance, we did a survey on the city lot at the junction, and we did a survey on the Tacoma Rec Center property. Those were in the neighborhood of something like $10,000 to $12,000, I think, for the surveys. We would also, if we were looking at property to buy, we would want to look at stormwater management stuff, for instance. Or we did environmental site assessment phase 1 and phase 2 on the city lot at the junction. Those actually are much more expensive because of the chemical analysis of phase 2. But if we're acquiring property, then as a potential buyer, we would want to do due diligence to make sure that we understand the ramifications of what we're taking on.
We have there's a number of either paper streets or kind of stubbed streets around the city that people kind of use as a neighborhood thing. But if you want to make it ADA accessible, or if you want to, you need to think about how the drainage goes, you may need to do some testing or measurements of various kinds. And that's something that we've just not had. We will do it, see if somebody's got some money in their budget for one aspect or the other, but it's been, like I said, a little bit haphazard, and we haven't had the plan to work with, so.
And are there pieces of property that you feel like we would be able to purchase for this, this sort of, a lot of the property in the city is extremely expensive, so, in terms of actually making a purchase, I'm just curious what sorts of things you're thinking about.
This isn't procurement money.
Right.
It isn't money to buy land. It's really money to do our due diligence to see if it suits our purposes. The plan will identify criteria and look at where we need more green space, where we need active or passive space, where we, recognize that there are gaps that we want to fill in. But we need to know what we're taking on. I mentioned in the message sent out this afternoon, the city was offered a donation.
Right.
It would be really useful to say, okay, that's great, but is that going to work for us? Do we want to know ahead of time before we take something on if it has environmental contaminations that we would be responsible for cleaning up?
Mm-hmm. And that's what the funds could be used for.
That's right.
Okay.
It's really, the way I think about it is tools to then take the plan forward.
Mhm.
So it's nice to have a plan, but without anything to
Mhm.
work with, you can't really do much with it.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you for the explanation. It does sound like this type of funding can be useful. I just have to say it feels a little bit like we're not exactly there yet. It sounds like the plan itself may be a ways away. And I suppose it's always possible that someone else could come forward and offer a donation, as was described. And if something like that were to happen and it looked like it was worth exploring, the potential value of it, or for the contamination, I think we could do that. I don't see us in the coming year doing another purchase like we did with Dorothy's Woods and all the questions that entailed, though. So to me, this seems like potentially useful, but a bit of an add-on this year. So I would favor reducing it, not going forward with it.
Mm-hmm. All right, any other comments or questions? All right, I'll just say thank you very much for the clarification. Sorry. Go
Sorry,
ahead. That's all right.
I'm late to the game.
No, it's all right.
So I do want to ask how these types of, because we've obviously had to do this before, right? what bucket of money does these types of surveys normally come out of? Is it necessarily the case that we're just shifting the line item to now be a part of the public land management plan implementation? It used to be somewhere else in the budget, because I would assume that we would need to have these resources available to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's sometimes been, we've looked around for different things. Sometimes there's been some public works money in a sidewalk project budget, or in an engineering budget, or maybe there's a stormwater connection that we can piggyback on. Sometimes there's money in my budget, and we just, move it around. It's only $2,000 or something for something, and we've done that. As I said, we've scraped every unit, so that's why this one kind of gets left over as a entity. The other aspect that I think, and part of the reason that I didn't just exit out from the beginning, is that there's a lot of projects and opportunity parcels right now. There's discussions with a number of people selling their multifamily buildings. There's a number of people, there's the hospital, there's J&A, there's these other things, J&A's association with Spring Park. We were fortunate to be able to have some work done by an applicant to pay for a survey for a portion of that and correct it, and we didn't have to pay that out, but those kinds of things pop up. And so I just feel like it's bubbling out there. I do not know if we'll spend the money. I do not know that this is the right amount of money. So there's that. But I also feel that there's not a lot of excess in other places where we might just shift things around like we may have done at one point.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Devala.
Yeah, sorry, one more question. And so, one of the things that's not on the reconciliation list, I don't think, is $20,000 in HCD for housing-related work, which I thought was a fund to implement the housing plan. And so can that be used for some of this, if something comes up? If it's housing related, you mentioned multifamily
Well,
just now.
if it were something that fell into a particular bucket, we would try to use funds from that. But yes, there's not, I mean, that would be a discussion for you about how you would use housing reserve or some other funds.
Sorry, I didn't mean housing reserve. I meant
Some
the
implementation.
20,000 for implementing, which is, I think,
It's-
separate.
Yeah, I mean, I think there will be a lot going on. So that could be.
All right, any other questions on this one? So I just want to thank the staff again for that clarification. I did go back and look at what was presented a couple of months ago in the meeting, and glad to hear that we are on schedule. And so if we are on schedule, given what was presented that evening, it does look like we'll be able to finish up the plan and start implementing it. So it's a good thing. So all those in favor of keeping this on the reconciliation list that would eliminate the public land management plan implementation, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, and 4 not. So that stays in the budget. All right. The next we have eliminating the HCD storage construction. Oh, that one, oh yes, we should talk about it, but that actually doesn't have anything to do with the tax rate though, if we do cut it, correct?
That one does not, yeah.
All right, but we should talk about it if we, I think there was some other information shared if we want to just talk about what it is we're actually cutting here potentially.
So, in the HCD area, there's not quite enough offices for the potential number of staff. We do have a vacancy in the director position right now, and so we are using that office for one of our managers. There's also been interest in having a little semi-private area for some of the discussions that we have with tenants who come in with landlord-tenant questions that may involve family members or things, and they're not necessarily comfortable just sharing those kind of where many can see and hear, and there's not much storage. So there was a proposal to try to do some reconfiguring of the way that the walls and dividers are in that area to both accommodate a new office as well as address some of the storage needs. And so that's why there were funds set aside for this. I don't have a final plan yet on that, but there has been a lot of discussion about how that might be able to be done, so we're looking at that. That was identified out of the facilities maintenance reserve, so it is not something that if you cut it, it wouldn't save anything on the tax rate.
Councilwoman DeBala?
Yeah, can I just ask a question? So in the facility maintenance reserve, is there in this budget a contribution to that for
This year, I did not put a contribution into the facility maintenance reserve.
Okay, so it doesn't affect the tax rate, but it does affect the level of the reserve? Not much, it's
It doesn't make
$10,000.
any difference either way. I mean, it will use some of the facility maintenance reserve, so it will stay in those funds will stay in the budget, in the bank until another project is identified.
Okay.
Any other questions on this one? Just to say, given the need for the space and having spent time in the office and knowing sometimes the difficult situations and conversations staff has to have with residents who come in and the fact that we need to hire a director and moving forward and how tight things are back there, I would actually and the fact that this is part of our reserves that we plan for, I would actually vote for taking this off and keeping it in. Councilwoman DeBala?
Yeah, I just wanted to say one more thing. When this went on the list, it was labeled as renovating a closet storage area.
Right,
Right,
yeah.
So we're hearing something different now that sounds more,
It was
Useful.
a misnomer of that, and frankly, it was misnamed.
Okay. So all those in favor of keeping the, well, we're going to call it a storage construction, whatever, this line item, the HCD office area from the reserves, taking it out, raise your hands, please. Which way? Keeping it, well, it's not really a reconciliation, because I guess it is a reconciliation item. Keeping it on the reconciliation item, which will take $10,000 out of the reserves. Raise your hands if you support that. No one. Okay, so that stays in the budget. All right. The next item was reducing the third floor renovation budget. If you want
Yes.
to speak about this.
Daryl?
It's easier if Ms. Braithwaite explains some of the complexity of the third floor public areas.
Sure. We currently have underway with our on-call architect an evaluation of several areas of the third floor, one of which that's in the budget is to expand and reconfigure the cable office area so that they have the room they need to work and it's more conducive to the sound booth and everything else they need to do in there. It also takes advantage or helps us solve a problem we have in the back of that unstaffed lobby area that's just by the back elevator. It's just kind of an open space that if you're actually sitting in that desk, the bathrooms are right across the way, so anybody coming and going in the bathrooms, you have the unfortunate opportunity to see much more of your coworker than you want to. So it would provide us the opportunity to move that wall out, eliminate that space since it's not currently used, and create that space as part of the cable office area. So that'll also provide the ability for someone coming up the rear elevator to have a more clear path. The first thing they'll see is the finance window and then directed to the HCD window or to the front, the administrative space. So that walkway will, hang together better. We can do signage. We can help facilitate direction so you're not just kind of hanging in this big open space that looks like a lobby but doesn't
It
serve
looks
that
kind of like a
purpose.
junk room in lobby, yeah.
So that is underway in design.
And the funds for that would come from the cable grant. That is not part of this, but it's part of the overall concept. It's just that those funds would come out of cable grant funds.
Right, and they're shown in the CIP separately, together but separate. The other two aspects are in the front of the building, moving to the other elevator bank. Right now, you come up the stairwell, you're facing, again, another unstaffed lobby area, whereas if you come up the elevator, you're facing a hallway kind of into what looks like a lobby with chairs, so you don't really know where to go. So the plan there is to create the opening so that people would come out the same way. So instead of, both the elevator and the door would open in the same plane. So then it gives you the opportunity again to have signage to direct people where they need to go. And then to create in that space a more enclosed area so that right now anybody sitting up there is kind of inundated with sound from the rest of the building. With the atrium close-in, it'll help cut off some of that sound, but we'll still have sound from the second floor, which is a fairly active area at different parts of the day. So it'll create a space there which will have a welcome window, so it'll be obvious where you're supposed to go, where a person's supposed to talk to you, and it'll help direct people there. We're also planning to establish a section of that area for a lactation room or meditation room or whatever, private access for folks who need it. That's in the budget this year, but was put on hold as part of this. What we were envisioning at that time was a pod, a kind of buy-alone unit that you'd stick in a corner somewhere. It really it limits its use. So whereas we feel like if we can create a lactation room, which has a closing door and a nice chair, then people can schedule to use it. And if someone needs a quiet room, it's there as well. So that would be part of that front lobby space.
So part of this is it makes it a more welcoming area. It also allows, if a staff person is sitting out there, which that would be the envisioned thing, to have a person there to be greeting, they would actually have some security. Because we do have issues with security, particularly if you have an unhappy person. And the person who's sitting out there is just set by themselves. There's not any connections to the other offices or whatever, and so we would rearrange it so that it would be a component of the rest of the offices, but it would actually kind of jut out and have a window and everything, so it's a much more welcoming but safe place to work.
And now we have that
with it
locked
quiet.
door to the administrative
Right.
staff, which is kind of set back in, so that door would be moved up and all be contiguous with part of that administrative space and guest window, so it would all kind of hang together and make a little more sense.
And part of the, we were looking at this, we've been talking about it for some time because we get a lot of complaints about it, people not knowing where to go or it looking ugly and unattractive as people come in to meet with the council members or the staff. So we've had some security concerns that have been raised several times, trying to figure that out. So I think we've been talking about this for a long time. With the atrium change happening, it seemed like it made sense to try to take advantage of a number of the changes at the same time and get them done. It's still not going to be all at the same time, but kind of.
Right, we
the goal is-
anticipate having the concept design work done this year. There was funding for that in the facility maintenance reserve. So until we kind of see the various pieces and how complex they are, and then actually kind of work into final design and construction, we won't know which pieces of those we can afford to do, and it's really going to be based on the budget that's left in FY20 for that work.
And so as we get that, our staff is very handy. There may be some components that they can do. So, we were asked, what happens if we cut $50,000 out of the amount for this?
Can you turn your mic on?
125.
125.
125 for the third floor
For the
stuff,
front- for the
125 for
front
the
area.
cable.
Right.
Mhm. For both.
No,
yeah,
250
individually.
altogether.
Mhm.
But the 125,000 would come from the cable grant for the near the finance window area. The other 125,000 was for the front area. So the reduction of 50,000 that is here would come from that front area.
And those funds are from the general fund and
That's
would
correct.
impact the tax rate.
That's right.
Okay, and so I'm sorry if you said this and I missed it. So with the reduction of the 50,000, it wouldn't mean we cannot do any of the
Right.
things you described, but what would it mean? You don't know yet what we
Don't
couldn't
know
do.
which piece we'd be able to do once we get to, a final concept design that's reviewed and signed off from folks, then, we'd get construction estimates from the architect and we could figure out sort of the blocks, which ones we can do and which ones we get pushed to a, future year.
Okay.
I have a question. Is it possible that you could design it in a way that if we reduce the amount from 50 maybe to 25,000, that you could do part of it this upcoming fiscal year and then you could do the balance of it the following fiscal year?
Yeah,
Well,
so
that's what we were talking about. We'll, whatever the funds are that you make available, we'll do what we can.
Yeah, and assuming that it'll be kind of finite little pieces that'll stack together and we'll figure out what we can afford and what we can't. And what we don't do just gets put into a future list of things we'd like to do.
But let me follow up on that. Are there, given the construction with the atrium and other things, I'm assuming there would be cost savings though to doing some things all at once versus not having the funds in this budget this year and pushing them off to another year.
What we're looking at there on the third floor is really kind of a standalone. We're not envisioning it as part of the police department renovation and the atrium close-in. We're sort of seeing that on a separate track because it's much further out ahead in terms of design. It's about, construction is final. Design is final. They're doing construction documents. We hope to go out to bid shortly. So it's way ahead of the rest of it. There is one piece in the front of the lobby. We have a very small closet and a kind of a no man's land. If you look, it's a little bit of an art
Like
art
on the other
gallery.
side of the waiting area, there's a door that
Where
has a little closet.
You can
back
see
there.
down to the second floor and the underneath it. So there's an opportunity there to pull that wall out and make that all storage space. So there's a possibility there because that requires some structural work. That is something, since the atrium is also structural work with putting in beams across, it may be one of those things that might make sense to do. But the rest of it really will stand alone as a fairly simple, room renovation building project.
I think the only other area that just will require a little bit of structural stuff that our staff wouldn't just do is perhaps changing the exit from the stairwell and how that comes out, because there may be some structure aspects to that that we have to be very careful about.
Okay. Councilwoman DeBala?
And I thought I heard you say that some of this year's is funded from facility maintenance? And if that's.
Yes, the design work is coming out of the facility
But
maintenance
the
reserve.
construction work can't be.
We didn't have enough money
Yeah.
in the reserve for.
I don't remember what it's pulled out of the CIP, but if it's general fund, then that was a decision made.
Councilwoman Searcy?
And what's the estimated timeline for this project?
The third floor? Again, we're just in concept design, so it could happen next year, again, depending on funding. It'll all be fairly simple, and it won't require a whole lot of staff moving around to shift because, basically we can direct people to another way into the third floor while that construction is going on. Obviously, the cable office work will be a little disruptive, but they have other spaces that they can work out of. So we'll be able to integrate it fairly simply into everybody's regular daily work. So it could definitely happen within, a few months across the year.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions on this one? All right. All those in favor of keeping on the reconciliation list the reduction in the third floor renovation, please raise your hand. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Stays in. All right. So, yeah. Sorry, sometimes it gets confusing. All right, the next, yeah. All right, the next items we're gonna look at is the proposed reduction in new sidewalks and the reduction in the street rehab. Both of these were put on the list. The first we'll take is the reduction in new sidewalks. I just want to clarify, this is reduction in new sidewalks, and this would also include traffic calming, same pot of money, correct? And Ms. Braithwaite, would you just talk, I know on Friday, we had, either you or I with the city manager had a conversation regarding the increased costs that you're seeing right now in sidewalk construction.
We've always, with the new sidewalk work, in addition to the design cost and the construction cost, we also pay from that source of money any tree removal, tree replacement costs to meet our tree replanting requirements. We're also mandated by the stormwater ordinance to identify stormwater treatment for the added impervious area, so that's always come out of those costs. And so the cost for stormwater management is increasing pretty significantly, especially for projects like Lincoln Avenue and Glenside, which is quite a bit of sidewalk work in terms of actual square footage of sidewalk being added. So the cost for that is getting to be significantly high. We just went through a process of developing the stormwater plan for the Lincoln Avenue sidewalk project. We'd included $130,000 in our budget for that. A portion of it coming from the stormwater budget, a portion of it coming from the sidewalk budget. The sidewalk budget portion was to just meet our treatment goals. The stormwater portion budget was, hey, as long as we're there, let's maximize. We've identified a ton of areas where we had stormwater, either insufficient facilities and people were having water on private property from the street, or opportunities to do more treatment so we could get closer to our treatment requirement. So the pricing came back in with our on-call contractor of $360,000. So we're sorely under budgeted for that. We anticipate a similar deal with the Glenside sidewalk, and again, we know going in there, we've got some treatment requirements. We also know, based on comments and conversations we've had with the community, as well as our own survey work and walking around, that there's insufficient structures there, and we've got real erosion and stormwater issues that are happening downstream into Long Branch. And so as long as we're there and doing that work, that's the ideal time to do it. So for Glenside, we anticipate just some inlet work and some pipe work, as well as the treatment work. And so we are anticipating, based on the initial design concept we've talked to with the engineers, it's going to be a very hefty price. So, you know, in the past, for instance, Erskine Avenue sidewalk is still awaiting its stormwater treatment that's required based on the amount of impervious area. So we can, you know, stretch it out and just put it in yet another year. It just then becomes what those funds are going to be used for. To meet the requirements, and so we don't have the funds available to do new and additional work.
And I just want to clarify, because we're talking about stormwater and sidewalks, but this is money that the sidewalks, the construction of the sidewalks is actually costing more in these circumstances, and the money's not just coming out of the stormwater.
Right. We pay for the treatment required from the impervious area of sidewalks out of the sidewalk money, because we see it as a cost associated with that. We leave our stormwater funding to those treatment requirements and stormwater system requirements separate from the added new impervious area.
Great. Just want to clarify that.
Yeah.
Because it could.
And, you know, this fund has also been used for traffic calming, as you mentioned, as well as new sidewalks. So there's a lot of work that gets done out of those funds. And, you know, the requests kind of go up and down. We're actually, you know, with Lincoln Avenue and Glenside, highest amount of square footage of sidewalk we've done in, I think, ever. So we've got some really large projects going. We're also hoping to kick off the Flower and Sligo Creek Parkway traffic calming project, which has, again, been a very long-awaited project that we've had on the books for years. So we've got several expensive projects that are well-designed, planned, community is expecting them, that we need to build.
Councilmember Cover?
So if the proposed amount of 100,000 were to be approved, a cut of 100,000, this is just for the new sidewalks now we're talking about, not ADA compliance, right? And so if that 100,000 is reduced or approved to be reduced, then how much would remain for the coming fiscal year?
150. We asked for 500. It got reduced to 250, so that's what's in the budget now. This reduction of 100 would bring it down to 150.
So if maybe I didn't get the numbers correct, but if the one project was at 360, so that can't be done even with the 250, or is that by combining it with the stormwater funds that you got
It was
there?
$360 together, split half and half between stormwater and new sidewalk funds.
Okay.
We're anticipating doing that in this fiscal year. We have $800,000 in this
Okay.
fiscal year that we rolled from the previous year. So we've got a big pot of money. We're going to spend every penny of it by the end of June.
So
no
for
money
next
left.
year, what would you anticipate?
We
would
could
be the-
easily spend $500,000
Or is there a
next year.
specific
Yeah.
project or more
We'll be
lined up?
finishing up the Glenside sidewalk. We have the Flower Avenue project, which is inclusive of, the new sidewalk is all in the Flower Avenue, Green Street, as is all the rest of the work. However, the work on the opposite side is ADA work. We may not have funds for that. That's a separate pot of money. We have 2 existing requests in. One is for 8,000 block of Maple Avenue. Another's for Kansas Avenue, which has been kind of hanging out there for quite a while. We've been getting a lot of, emails and calls from residents interested in sidewalk work, Sligo Mill, and some other places, so we anticipate that the requests will continue to come in.
Councilwoman Costick? Oh, Councilwoman Kovar, are you done? Yeah, okay. Costick.
I just wanted to point out that one of the things on the resident survey that people noted was a concern about traffic and traffic speeds, traffic volume. So I see this as something we really need to go ahead and fund and make sure that we're addressing those concerns. Thank you.
Councilmember Siemens?
Thank you. I was just curious about, I know we used to pay for a lot of our sidewalk work from the speed camera funds. And I'm
We don't
wondering,
have extra monies from the speed camera funds.
what are we
they
spending
pay-
that money on now?
We pay for, there's 3 positions in the police department, which are traffic related. And then we have a small amount that's used for some police equipment and that kind of thing. There's not extra money. There used to be large amounts and they could work for infrastructure, but there's not that kind of numbers anymore.
So we need more speeders.
No, with the program worked very well at reducing accidents. I feel very strongly that the cameras are very useful in that regard, but they are not a cash cow.
Great.
I think we last used speed camera funds 2014, so it's been many years.
Thank you.
Councilmember Searcy?
Thank you so much, and I just want to echo my colleague here in stating the importance of sidewalk traffic calming, particularly in my ward with the increase in construction that's happening, uncertainty around the Purple Line and the impacts that it may have on traffic patterns. But also, I do want to echo the point that you've made about, and we've seen with the Glenside project, how stormwater management and sidewalk projects in a weird way work hand in hand with one another. And so it is important to, you can have one without the other, but then you may have residents being disrupted more than once, and it's ideal to just explain what's happening and get it done at one time. So I definitely want to urge my colleagues to fund the sidewalk budget, because it's something, if you don't hear about sidewalks and traffic calming, then you obviously don't open your email. Thanks so much.
Great. And I'm just going to underscore what Councilwoman Costick and Searcy just said. I would very much like to keep this in the budget this year. It's already been cut enough, and so I think we should move forward. Councilwoman DeBala, did you have something else to add here?
Yeah, I was wondering about whether a smaller reduction would make sense to consider, and I was trying to remember where the $100,000 number came from in the first place. So I was wondering if it was worth considering a smaller reduction.
Well, why don't we vote on this
Yeah.
one, and then we can, all right, all those in favor of the $100,000 reduction in reducing new sidewalks and traffic calming, please raise your hand. One person. Would you like to propose a different amount?
I would like to propose a reduction of 50.
Okay. Any questions on that? No. All right. All those in favor of reducing the new sidewalk and traffic calming by 50,000, please raise your hand. That's 3. So it stays in. So we take out the reduction. So the new sidewalk and traffic calming budget stays the same as the proposed budget. Next, we have reducing the street rehabilitation budget. Ms. Braithwaite, did you want to speak to that at all? Or?
Sure, I think in the original budget was 500,000. Have we already reduced it to 400, or this brings it to, actually, it's It's is it 500 now? I'm sorry, I'm having a little, okay.
It's from
So this
500
would,
to 400.
so this would be dropping at $100,000. Basically, our $500,000 level is the level in which we need to maintain a 20-year cycle for streets. So any reduction in that just extends the life of some roads, and our goal is to have no streets below fair condition. And we've been making very good progress on that in the last 10 years with the increased funding from the council for street rehabilitation. We do our street resurfacing work based on a pavement condition survey, so streets are evaluated about every 7 years, and then we work our way from the bottom up through that. So we're a couple more years away before doing another pavement condition survey, but we're getting now to the streets that we need to, so.
Councilmember
And
Seaman?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
And I just wanted to say that besides, there's a remarkable, a much greater expense if a street gets very bad to have it rehabbed. But also, if you have potholes or you have splits, so that kind of thing, it makes bicycling more difficult. You get cars trying to avoid the potholes and then endangering people walking by and that kind of thing. So it is something that we feel pretty strongly about, is keeping the roads up to at least a fair condition, I think, is essential.
Great, thank you, Ms. Ludlow. Councilmember Siemens?
Thank you, Mayor. When I joined the council many years ago, many of our roads were in very poor condition. Wouldn't say as bad as Flower Avenue is right now, but that's something that we caused by doing a lot, asking a lot of the utilities to get all the work done in that area at one time. But anyways, the council worked very long on trying to come up with a strategy for keeping our roads in good repair, and developed the road survey and a way of predicting the life of each roadway in Tacoma Park, and then putting enough money in the budget each year so that we would be able to cycle through and maintain the roads in good condition. I would just dispute one thing that was said earlier, and that is that decreasing the amount does not extend the road life. It just causes the roads to go into disrepair and end up costing the community more, not just in the amount of money it costs to repair the roads, but also in the damage to vehicles and the problems it causes for bicyclists and pedestrians. So I don't think this is an option. I think this is an amount of money we should be putting in. It's a formula that's used. It's revised when there are discrepancies in the formula, but we should go with the formula amount and not use it to, as a bank account to spend money on things. It's an operational account we should keep. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Costick?
I want to echo Councilmember Siemens' comments. I know I was the person who put this on the reconciliation list originally, but I really appreciate the information that's been shared about the additional cost as well as the safety concerns. So I do not support a reduction in the street rehabilitation. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And I just want to echo what Councilmember Siemens says. And I appreciate all the work he and others did before we got on the council, so that we had formulas in place and we have ways to plan. I think, as I said last week, one of the most important things for a government is to have stability, and that we can communicate to residents about when, how we're evaluating the streets, when they will be repaved. I think your department has done an excellent job. Not to name names, but you compare it to other governments in their region, I think we are high above what they do. And I believe that when something is working, we shouldn't tinker with it. So I would like to see this continue to be funded at the level it should be. All right. Let's see. All those in favor of keeping this on the reconciliation list and reducing street rehabilitation by $100,000, please raise your hand. It's one vote for that. So that gets off the reconciliation list and stays in the budget. All right. That then takes us to our last few categories. The next big group of things we're going to be looking at have to do with the neighborhood commercial district improvements, the rec center public engagement, economic development intern, and funding for OTBA and CDA. So let's first start with the money for the neighborhood commercial district improvements. The full amount that is set aside for this program was $100,000. And Ms. Cook-Gaines, do you want to just come up and, I know you started speaking about this before, but I think we had over the last couple of weeks a number of questions on this. If you want to just kind of give us a quick overview of.
Absolutely. So this is, to start, the council has made a very strong movement to develop a division that is economic development. The issue is there are no tools to actually do economic development aside from staff time. So this is one of the major tools. In this budget would include things like a facade improvement program. There are certain commercial districts that don't have the charm or the culture that Tacoma Park is used to, and these businesses have been left to languish. They definitely need more than their own private investment. They are also, if you can think of it this way, these are also renters. Therefore, they don't have a lot of control over their property. Things that we can control around facade improvements are things like public space art that we talked about earlier. Also signage programs. These are extremely important programs because the actual business owners are able to do things like, put in some extra funds, get signage, upgrade the front of their stores. These are visual cues that a commercial district is healthy. And currently, a lot of our commercial districts do not look as healthy as they should. So this money is specifically something that focuses around things like that. The other piece I was speaking about earlier was placemaking. Placemaking is about creating the public space of a commercial district inviting. So if you can imagine where there are benches outside, when there are green space, if we take some of our commercial districts where we have folks putting outdoor seating, you want to sit outside because the place is beautiful. It's a place where you want to enjoy a meal, meet a friend. There are other commercial districts that, look barren. And we can improve those spaces, not just with infrastructure improvements that are extremely important, as my colleague just mentioned, but also with place-making projects. So I had mentioned New Hampshire Avenue and Ethan Allen. Right now, it just looks like the corner of a highway. We can literally use this money to make that a more inviting corner. We know now that people gather in that place because they have to. And when you have to stand in a barren or desolate looking place, it doesn't speak to an equitable attention to our commercial districts. So I see this as a major tool. And there are very few economic development tools aside from staff time.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Smith, do you have a question?
Ms. Cook-Gaines, thank you. A couple questions for you. Will you require the business owners to match any funds or give any type of money that it doesn't have to be equal to what we're doing, but something to show that, they have some skin in the game?
I would, and that can look two ways. It can look like, so the skin can be a check. It can be that we're giving matching funds or a third or what have you. But we can also require them to go through technical assistance. So many times a business will assess their own failures and they'll just say, oh, we need better marketing. When the truth is it could be full operations, cash flow management. So you can tie these funds to, additional kind of internal business development skills. So they may think they're getting new signage, but they actually recognize that they have a better understanding of their product management, for example.
And how do you foresee making sure that, like, wards 4 and 5 that aren't covered by any of the business organizations, that they get an equal amount of funding for something like this?
Well, this funding would not be designated for a specific association. This funding would be citywide funding established, and there would be criteria that speaks to that. So the idea that there's not an organized association already representing your interests could be a part of the criteria.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah.
Right. Councilwoman Searcy.
Thank you so much. I am excited to hear about the planned programmatic activities. I can't stress how critical they are, particularly for the Crossroads district. And given that the Purple Line is coming, construction is happening, and one of the major issues that a number of the small businesses are going to have is signage. Not just signage pointing you to an entrance, but making sure that their little sign can be seen over the cranes, right? And so trying to figure out ways to invest or create opportunities to not only help small local businesses in the community and giving them the avenues to succeed, but to think about our economic development as an investment. Right?
Right.
It's really easy to feel like we're writing a check, but we're not writing a check. What we're actually doing is we're investing in businesses in our area, and by that investment, the hope is that we will reap returns in terms of how assessments may go up. They may expand. We may see increase in density that has been communicated in the various sector plans that everyone has seen, the very beautiful pictures of what some of our commercial areas are supposed to be designed to be. So I definitely want to encourage my colleagues to think of some of the what's been initially put forward in terms of the neighborhood commercial district improvement funding, but also all of the items that are listed in this green space as really taking a step forward towards investing in development in our community, with the idea that we'll eventually be able to reap the financial rewards of doing so. So thank you so much for explaining what you have planned for this particular pot of resources.
Great. Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you. Yeah, I had originally mentioned the idea of not including the funding at all. Now that it's been explained better, and this isn't the first time you've explained it, obviously, I am supportive, I think, as I mentioned to some of my colleagues previously, having 50 and not the full 100. And I would just add that there's $20,000 or $30,000 also for commercial or small business assistance included separately in the budget, as well as the inventory tax reduction that we made. So
those are two different funds. So
right,
one is technical assistance,
but
and one
it's
is
additional work, that additional
yes.
funding that's available for them, is what I'm saying.
Yes.
So I feel that changing that from 100 to 50 is not, you know, an abandonment of that as much as just I'm not sure we could spend that all in the next year, since we haven't yet even finished the strategic plan yet. So that's why I'm suggesting that the amount be reduced from 100 to 50. Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Smith, did you have any other?
No.
Okay. So then, Councilmember Kovar, did you want to remove the request to zero this out? All right, is everybody okay with that? So the removal of the $100,000 is gone. Okay. So now this is kind of one of those categories that does get a little tricky because I think there is, and I think the way we should talk is talk about all the other items here and then be able to reflect on that, because I think some of them do interact with each other.
Sure.
So for the moment, just hold as a place that what is on the table is to reduce by half, by $50,000, the neighborhood commercial district improvements that were just discussed. The other item that was put on as an addition is $50,000 toward public engagement consultant for the New Hampshire Avenue Rec Center. At the moment, we don't have any funding in the proposed budget to go towards that. Ms. Gaines, did you want to speak to that at all, or?
I'll just say public engagement is important here in Tacoma Park, and it's important that we do this well. So with that said, we don't want our next big steps into economic development to have a shadow over them because we made missteps in public engagement. So with that said, I will say that the current listed amount will get you something. It may not get you what you really need. So I'll just leave that there.
Okay, great. Councilwoman Searcy, your thoughts?
I do want to echo the importance of thinking about public engagement now. And I want to encourage people to think of public engagement around the rec center development differently from the development itself. I also think it's important for residents to have maybe a third party come in to help educate us all on development generally, and what the process is, and how it works, and what it means to be in a public-private partnership, and what you can expect and what is just pie in the sky. And I think the sooner that we can start having these conversations, particularly as it relates to the recreation center, I think the easier our time might be down the road. I agree that the original amount of $50,000 is not enough. I think our goal should be to try to make this something that would be appealing to some community engagement firms that typically work on larger scale development projects, because this is going to be big. Like, if you think the Junction is like this, the Junction has nothing on the rec center. I'm just going to be honest. It pales in comparison. And so if we don't do our due diligence to start putting the wheels in motion now, not just from the perspective of making sure that our constituents can have a say in how many treadmills, but also making sure that we're building the sense of community with the necessary experts that could potentially also overlap with whichever development partner we decide to select, I think that's going to be critical for us moving forward. So again, I encourage my colleagues, again, to think through potential investment, that we can try to learn from some of the experiences we've had thus far with the Junction, and try to be proactive in terms of thinking through ways in which to address some of those challenges that we know will lie ahead with the recreation center.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Smith.
Ms. Cook Gaines, how much do you think would be the right number for an engagement person that would be able to do what we really need?
I'd rather not quote a number. I will say I do not think that the 50,000 is enough. I think that the 75 suggestion is a good start.
And I would just note that I happen to know that there was a community engagement process for a nearby development, and that cost well over $100,000 for what was done there, and it would probably be somewhat comparable to this project.
I agree with our deputy city manager.
The other thing that, though, we can think a little bit about is how much might actually happen in FY20 versus
Right.
something else. So, I mean, I think that part of the reason, I was asked, why didn't I include this in the budget? One, I was trying to keep costs low. Second, I wasn't really clear about some of the timing and the scope. And so, what the timing exactly is for the public engagement process is a little bit up to all of us. And all we know now is that we're likely to have the center on July 1. So,
Great. Councilwoman Costick.
Thank you for this explanation. And I generally agree. I think we do really need to make sure that we look very closely at the public engagement process on that. And as Councilmember Searcy said, we learn from the past, learn from the things we've done in the past, and make sure that we are creating a public engagement process that is really effective and that meets the needs of the project. And I also think moving forward, we need to try to build more staff capacity on those things as well, because we need to have the consultant come in and do things, but we also need to just be able to do them ourselves so that we have some capacity to supplement that. You know, the consultant is going to bring in that really specific expertise and is going to be there for a short period of time. But I do think we need to have some additional staff capacity in terms of just managing those things on a day-to-day level.
So we do have, we have a lot of actually staff capacity when it comes to public engagement. My background is such that I've had 15 years of public charrettes and engagement around planning. In addition, my colleagues in the HCD department have been a part of and are very adept at managing the process. The real issue is kind of, one, it's the short time frame, right? So if you can imagine, that would be every single day of our lives at work focused on this one thing. We're not answering calls, we're not doing anything else. So it's the tight time frame that kind of requires the consultant piece, one, and then it's the boots on the ground. So when it comes to business and business development and economic development, there's a lot of on the ground time that you just can't cover with, you know, 2 or 3 experts around public engagement. So that's really where it is. I wouldn't say that there's a lack of capacity or knowledge, we'll put it that way. I wouldn't say that there's a lack of staff knowledge, but the time capacity is not there.
So it's certainly in terms of actual hours in the day, there's not that. I think there's often value for a third entity that doesn't feel like staff is steering things as opposed to having a process. So even if we're doing things really cleanly and et cetera, we may not be believed. And so sometimes it's useful to have that extra, that third party, especially during the tense times when you're trying to work stuff out. I also think that we have had a lot of training, but can continue to have more training in some small aspects for the small things that we can do. But as you just heard, you know, we're stretched really thin, and so if we were trying to focus on this, we wouldn't be able to do some other things.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm not saying I don't think we should have a consultant. I'm saying I think in addition to the consultant, we need to build our staff capacity.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, the consultant's here for a while, and then we need to be able to continue and build on that work. And I would actually like to see more collaboration actually in these projects between HCD and the communications officer or media specialist or whatever her position is. Just because I think that there could be some natural cooperation there and some opportunity to think about the sort of how things are communicated and how things are expressed to the community. And the other thing regarding the rec center project that I think we really need to pay attention to is the need to get more information out to residents about it. Prior to our session today, I put out a survey toward 3 residents about the budget and their views on it. And on that question in particular, I think there was a real lack of understanding about where the project is right now, where it's going, what it might look like. And I think it really just struck home to me that we need to get more information out and need to sort of begin to present what the project is going to be or maybe. There are so many questions, but what it could look like and to just begin talking about it more and educating people more on what the thinking is and the goals are.
Well, I have to agree with your statement about the education, and Councilmember Searcy mentioned that there is a need for education around economic development. We're in a city that has not had it. You know, things don't just pop up overnight here at all. So the understanding of what those processes are, I think is kind of, you know, grade pre-K before we even step into that next level of what are the possibilities, because possibilities oftentimes will get a group of people coalesced around one idea, and then they're too closed off when you actually recognize that the process means something else is actually going to happen. So we don't want to build too many expectations around something that doesn't even have a beginning, you know? So if we all are just have our hearts set on having a blue vehicle, and then we find out that blue paint doesn't exist, people are still going to come in and ask for those blue vehicles. So we want to kind of educate on the process. So I completely agree with you. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Great. Councilmember Kovar?
Yeah, thank you. I guess this is one, again, where, you know, I wonder how much we'll really be able to do in the upcoming fiscal year. I mean, I guess I had assumed that the thought was we weren't ready for it since it wasn't in the budget. This is one that really is an add-on, unlike most of the rest of these. It's an entirely new thing that we're attempting to add here, which doesn't make it bad in any way, but I think, to me, that's just, I think 50,000 would be reasonable, but I think that's another reason we ought to offset it from the other 100. You know, 75, I mean, that's almost like hiring a full-time person to do this. If that's what we think we need to do, I think that's a separate conversation, and to contemplate that without really any discussion about it, I don't feel that comfortable with it. So I would support 50, but I wouldn't personally prefer to go higher than that.
Councilwoman DeBala?
Yeah, I'm really glad you're here, and I'm really excited about the opportunities. That said, I've got my eye on the bottom line, and since we've fully funded some of these other categories, I'm not sure that we can do all of this. And my thought, having not heard yet anything about the intern or the
We'll get there.
We'll
We're
get
not-
there.
We'll get
Yeah,
there.
so my thought is that I'm just, the rec center is clearly a priority for my ward. And so I'm very comfortable with that, and with a significant amount of money to do this new program in economic development. But I'm having a little trouble getting all the way to 100.
Great, and I'll just echo on the, before we move on to the intern, on the rec center, what I see some urgency in moving forward and would support the 75,000 Councilwoman Searcy moved forward is because this area is an opportunity zone with the purple line moving. I want to make sure that we're in a position to take advantage of all the things that are likely to start happening very quickly. And so while I appreciate the city manager looking at the budget and looking for places where you know, we may not want to have added, I actually see this as some place that we are ready to get this work done. I think there are a group of residents who've been ready for a while, and we want to engage an even broader group to move this process forward. So now, before we start voting on these different pieces, the economic development intern was also added onto the reconciliation list, and so this is actually moving, if I'm correct, I'm looking at the deputy city manager, from a half-time position to a full-time. Correct, okay. And can you talk to us a little bit about what that additional time would give your department?
I'd be able to sleep.
Yeah, I know.
Actually, that I'm anticipating hiring a student who is one who's already working on these types of issues. For example, this purple line, the opportunity zones, there are students as we speak that are studying New Hampshire Avenue. I would love to capitalize on some things, on those types of programs. We have a smart growth center at the University of Maryland, and they're all over the purple line. I'd love to be able to capitalize on some of the work that these students are doing right now. So the work that they would be doing with me, for example, some of it would be the daily work, like the business walks and the business outreach, the retention, kind of the local daily work, but also having someone who already is learning and understanding what's coming down the pike for us when it comes to economic development is going to be very helpful for me when I am managing the next stages of public engagement processes, when I am managing facade improvement programs. We'll have a student who kind of already has that there. Currently, I cannot touch every business. It's just not going to happen. I have kind of spoken to not just the council, but all of my colleagues and explained to them how I don't have a division of one, I have everyone else, you know, like they all work with me. I have everyone who's a part of the division because economic development touches all of the departments. Case in point, our workforce development, so we're talking about buildings and businesses, but we haven't at all touched workforce development. And we know that we have, a higher unemployment rate than we would like. We know that it only touches certain communities here. So something like workforce development is also something I'd love to wrap into this intern. There's not enough hours in the day, so I'd appreciate a full-term intern. Working a Monday through Wednesday and then you don't see them for 4 more days does kind of put a wrinkle in the forward movement.
Great. Councilwoman Searcy?
I fully support the economic development intern. We talk about all of the stuff that's coming down the pike, but yet it's just you, right? And so I don't believe in setting people up for failure. I think it's important, if we expect success, to give people the tools that they need in order to be successful, to meet what it is that we would like to see achieved. And providing you with some support, full-time support, I think is a critical piece in that direction. I also think that it's important, as we are starting to think about, I know this budget year is pretty tight, but perhaps down the line, we may be in a position to start thinking about additional staff in support of economic development. Having full-time interns that are available in a way that you can maybe groom and cultivate is an excellent opportunity for succession planning and making sure that you have someone waiting in the wings should an opportunity arise for additional staff support. So I definitely want to encourage colleagues to think about this intern and also think about the expectations. We've talked a lot about the things that may happen down the pike. There's also things that are happening right now in terms of engaging with current businesses, the various business associations, as well as still dealing with a number of things related to the Tacoma Junction project. So we can't forget that she's one person. So I would highly support additional staff to assist you.
Councilwoman DeBala?
Yeah, just a question, because I think having an intern with that kind of experience it's like hamburger helper for you. And to me, that's more important than the grant program to get started, because that's what we are, we're getting started. But the question that I have is, this says 22,000, and in terms of a full-time intern, continuing the full-time intern for which we're going to talk about later, for the sustainability program, that came out to 18,000. Is there some reason for the difference?
It was fewer hours. It was a difference in hours.
Okay, I thought the other intern was also full-time. Perhaps I was wrong about that.
My understanding is we didn't cut the sustainability interns' hours as much.
That was in the budget.
That was in the budget.
Yeah, in the budget, but later on, we will talk tonight about adding in the money to put that person back up to what I thought was gonna be full-time, and that would have added to 18, not 22, and that was my question.
I'm sorry, I don't know the answer.
I don't think that was ever budgeted to be a
I
full-time
don't think it
intern
was budgeted,
position. I
right.
think it was originally in a departmental request at a certain level, and
And
as
we
you all know,
reduced it some.
and we reduced it some, and the $8,120 would bring it back up to what the original departmental request was.
And my understanding was
Which was
that.
not quite full, I gather
not
then,
quite
not
full.
No,
quite
my
full-time.
understanding from talking to the head of Public Works last week is that this would extend the time that we had the intern through December. So I think we're not quite comparing apples to apples here. It's extending the length of time we have the intern.
Not the number of hours a
Right.
day.
And what we're talking here is, moving a part-time intern to a full-time intern. Councilmember Stevens.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight is still early, I realize, but for my brain, it's been a lengthy discussion with a lot of changes in our reconciliation list. I wonder if there's any update that you can give us on how we're doing on this. would be helpful is, you know, all these things, I'd like to add everything and keep everything, but like to have a feeling for where we are.
So in the yellow box, it has 5388. The rate that I originally proposed was 55.6. The constant yield is 5.26. The current FY19 tax rate is 5.291. So those are the various things.
And constant yield plus ECI is 53.
It's 5.397
Okay, so we're now below constant yield.
plus the
Plus
ECI.
ECI.
That's correct.
Okay, so we're,
Is there any double counting still left? Because
Yeah, I
Early
think it's,
in-
isn't the
early-
OTBA and CDA
Yeah,
are both.
Yeah,
there's some
OTBA.
offsetting things with OTBA and CDA.
But it's pretty close, it's not,
Mhm.
we don't have like $100,000 item still in there.
all right, I appreciate that. I think it's helpful in
Okay.
making judgment on these.
All right, so, any other questions on this? So what we're now gonna consider is the commercial district improvement budget, the, public engagement consultant, and the economic development intern. All three of those, okay? So what's on the table right now is reducing the neighborhood commercial district improvement, by half. So taking out $50,000 and leaving in 50. All those, any questions on that? All those in favor of reducing the neighborhood commercial district improvement by half, please raise your hand. Got 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so that, and then the next was the public engagement consultant for the recreation center. There are two items on the table. I'm actually going to start with the higher one and see if that passes. So who favors adding to our budget $75,000 for a public engagement consultant for the New Hampshire Rec Center? I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on that. So that, and then the next item in here is moving the economic development intern from part-time to full-time, and that would be in addition to our budget of $22,000. Who favors adding the additional $22,000 for the intern? Is that a hand up, Councilwoman DeMala? Yes, okay. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the intern is in. And I think you might be done, but people may have questions about the OTBA and CDA. So,
I'll stay right.
okay. All right, so next item is, they're put on the tape. So in the proposed budget this year, the OTBA and the CDA budgets were both reduced by $4,250. There are two proposals on the table. One would put them back to the level that they were last year, and another proposal would cut them further by another $5,000 each. So I don't know if, Ms. Gaines, if you have any views on the, You don't have to share.
I very unfairly believe that more economic development tools, the better. So I will say that. I will say I have developed great relationships with both associations. The minute I walked in the door, they were both very keen on getting to know me, understanding the vision for the city. So, you know, I have regular meetings scheduled with both associations, and I attend their membership meetings.
great. Councilmember Kovar?
Yeah, I think restoring the money for the two groups would be good. I just as sort of exhibit 1 or A or whatever it would be for those who were able to participate in the Art Hop over the weekend, which was a 2-day event. I definitely saw the mayor and Council Member DeBall there. I'm not 100% sure about the rest of my colleagues, but
I saw you.
yes. Did I see you in return?
No.
I turned my
You
eyes
were
away.
having a wonderful lunch.
I was having a wonderful lunch. But that's an example of the kind of program that they do. I suppose you could do versions of that without them, but I think that has an effect of bringing in not just local people who walk in from the neighborhood, but I think pulling in people from the outside. And so in the sense of, for a relatively modest amount, promoting the city and I think building in a way that, you know, I have expressed some skepticism about some of the other funding, but this has a proven track record. So I do think restoring the funding, and I'll acknowledge I'm less familiar with the work of Crossroads, but I know, for example, in the Diwali Festival and some of the other things, they're equally, I think, do an excellent job over in that part of the city. So I would favor restoring those funds.
Great. Councilmember Smith.
Can you tell us how you work with the business associations? I know you meet with them. But how do you coordinate your activities?
So we have executed contracts with both of the organizations. There are some variations on the contracts depending on the needs of the area. Those contracts include things like monitoring, for example, the vacancies and the turnover, having ears on the ground for businesses that need assistance. And then I am able to kind of connect to some of the referral partners I've been establishing here. And when the events are coming up, I definitely work to provide some input around city priorities, for example. Right. So when a business association has a certain footprint, the focus is on that footprint. But at times, there are things that you can do, and because I'm not, I'm the economic development manager for the entire city, you can kind of bring some other thoughts and opportunities to bear for the rest of the city. For example, if there is a festival in Old Tacoma, having vendors who are also from other parts of the city and not just Old Tacoma really benefits the idea of promoting all businesses. Now, the destination draw will of course be in that place. Right. However, you could be introduced to another business by going to an Old Tacoma event. Likewise, in the Crossroads, Springfest is coming up May 11th. May 11th, and that's a place where there will also be an opportunity to not just experience the businesses of the Crossroads, but to draw other businesses into the event. And for me, when small businesses start to meet each other, you start to see a magic that's right. about partnership creation, that's about, you know, new conversations. We have a business in Old Tacoma, in the Old Tacoma Business Association district that was born out of an organization in the Crossroads. And it's a very, you know, it's one of our newest restaurants. We're very excited about it. But again, born out of the Crossroads. So there's a nice synergy between the two, and I work to make sure that those synergies kind of continue. So it's more than just managing the contract for the day-to-day, right. But I really like to be the city voice of reason.
Okay. I spoke to Laura Barkley over the weekend at Art Hop, and she had a lot of great things to say about you and the things that she's doing in Old Town. So I will withdraw my request to reduce their budget. I think that, you know, before you came, we were just relying on, you know, these business associations. And so now, I guess what I would like to see is we can do even more, right? That they're like on the ground doing things, but you're 30,000 feet coming up with the plan, how we can really leverage ourselves and make economic development a priority in the city. So
I absolutely see them as part and parcel partners with the economic development that we have for those areas, but again, also citywide, because I do think that some of those benefits will definitely touch other areas.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Councilwoman Searcy.
Ditto to what was said before. One thing I can say about the Crossroads is that they work to bring the community and the businesses together in a way that we really didn't have very much in the ward. I know you mentioned the Diwali Fest, but a number of the fests that have been, or festivals that have been happening as of late have been in the actual communities, like on Ann Street, where you're actually getting residents who may not frequent some of the businesses that's right in their backyard to actually engage with the businesses, and similarly for the business owners to engage with residents in the community. So I think that's such an important role, and Art Hop is another example of bringing the community and businesses together in a way that not just benefits the businesses, but it benefits our community as well, especially when we pride ourselves on trying to encourage shopping local, eating locally. So trying to make that connection, I think, is critical, and I think both organizations have done a great job in trying to bridge those connections between residents and the business community. So I definitely support restoring their funding.
Great. All right, so since we had one of the items taken off the list, the one we're left with is restoring the OTBA and the CDA funding back to the FY19 funding level. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Yeah, I think that's everyone. So we'll add that in to the budget. All right, thank you. Now, moving from economic development to sustainability. These two items were put on an increase in the sustainability contract budget of $15,000 and increasing hours for the sustainability intern. As we mentioned before, this is, we have a sustainability intern right now, and this would enable us, if they were so willing to stay, to extend their time. We are to get the sustainability plan that we've been talking about back in October. And then once we are able to actually get the plan back from the consultant, it'll take some time for us to kind of digest it, look at it, and having the intern there through December will assist with that. Great. Ms. Braithwaite, do you want to add anything regarding the sustainability contract or the intern at this point?
Yeah, the original budget that we presented to the city manager was reduced again as part of this process of trying to do everything we can do and spread the pain. So some of the items that were eliminated from the original budget proposal that Gina put together included a reduction of $19,000 for new programming. There still is funds, $15,000 for programming, but that additional funds was identified as basically just seed money for the recommendations of the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan. In addition to that, we had funding set aside of $30,000 proposed for commercial rebates. So that was reduced by $10,000 to $20,000, and we had $10,000 in residential rebates that was reduced by $5,000. My understanding of the $15,000 requested increase was to put back in the commercial and the residential rebate money. If you look historically, and I think you saw that chart that we put together, we don't always spend the money, but we certainly do a lot of effort to try to get that money spent. So it's basically just having those funds available should someone be able to capitalize on it. We've seen great response. I don't know if you've heard about it, but we did a citywide mailing for both the low and moderate income rebate money as well as the residential rebate money, and that has kicked off quite a good response so far, so we're looking forward to that continuing. But it's also been a great program in which we can work with Grace and Samira and even the rec department just to share, with their seniors program, just to try to figure out all avenues to get to these folks that may be able to capitalize on that, on the rebate funds, and make sure they're aware of it.
Terrific.
Just to be clear, the amounts that we were cutting for these various programs were amounts that historically we haven't haven't used. So we were kind of more right-sizing it, not trying to undercut these programs. And in fact, we would do everything we can to ensure that we serve both multifamily and business clients on these, because it's the right thing to do, and it's exciting when it works.
Great. Councilwoman DeBala?
Yeah, I was going to say something very similar to what Ms. Braithwaite just said, with the synergy of having a more robust staff in housing and particularly in economic development, we're seeing a new response, and we're seeing a more avenues for reaching the folks that need to be reached. And that's one of my main reasons for wanting to put some of the money that was reduced back in to complement the funds that we just voted on for economic development. And, well, we can vote on housing, we never voted to take it out, but yeah, just to put that all together. And I'm also optimistic, perhaps too much, that the consultant will come back as contracted in October to talk to council about new programs. So if we start to think about a plan, not just existing programs, but a plan to do to do more things to ramp up, I'm optimistic that we don't have to wait till July 1st if we have a little bit of funding. And you heard about the intern. There's one on staff. He's good. He works well with everybody. And if he can stay, that just increases the chances that the planning process will go as scheduled, and that rebates that are being requested now will go out in a timely fashion.
Right, and anytime you have offices like the sustainability manager, which is a one-person show, which a lot of our professionals are, there may be an ability to bring an intern in just to help get something out that otherwise we wouldn't be able to. So it doesn't not necessarily have to be a linear, keep them on for X number of months, but it could be 4 weeks of a real intense campaign like we did initially, where we had them canvassing door to door about the energy rebate program. So there's all kinds of ways that we could use intern hours, and so we sort of see it just as a number of hours available to add to the existing staff position.
Yeah, and perhaps it doesn't need to be said, but I'm going to say it anyway, that one of our top priorities as a council is addressing the impacts that we all have on climate change. And this is both doing that and targeting folks who could use the help. So I feel pretty comfortable in supporting an increase.
And how much are you talking about?
We're talking about $22,000,
Yeah,
Hang on.
15 and 8.
8,000 for the intern additional to go, and then 15,000 for the contract
Total
money
of 23,000.
instead of 34,000 for a total of 23.
Okay.
Math, not my strong point.
Okay. Great, and I'll just say I support particularly the increased hours for the sustainability intern. I think, it's going to be exciting once we get the report back, and then to provide Gina with that extra support so that we can, as Councilwoman DeBala said, we have declared a climate emergency plan, and that means it's an emergency. So we don't want to sit on the plan. We want to get it implemented. We want to move forward with this. So I am particularly supportive of having the intern put back in place. Councilwoman Costick, and then Searcy.
I was wondering if you could scroll up to look at the tax rate. Okay. Can we, before we vote on this, can we talk about the tax credits as well? So we have a sense of whether that is the correct estimate for tax credit, the tax credit amount?
Yeah, so I think if you put in the tax credit amount 22,500, I'm just gonna say, just put that in as a placeholder, since it is a placeholder. I actually think if we do put in the sustainability, the extra 15,000 and the intern, we get down to constant yield plus ECI. Okay.
And do we think that 22,500 is an accurate estimate?
I think at this point, well, we don't know, and I'll let Councilman DeBala speak to this, but I think our my understanding is the 35,000, or whether it's 22,500, was a placeholder for us to figure out what we actually want to implement. We can piggyback onto the county programs. However, the county programs were only put in place for 5 years as they wanted to study and look at it. In addition, the county programs are not income qualified. So it's if you lived in your house for 40 years and you're 65 and older or a veteran, and we need to make decisions about who's going to qualify at how much are we going to match the county if we're going to do it for a year. So there's a couple of things we need to.
If I could speak to it, there wasn't something that said that there's a magic number. It depends a lot on what kind of program gets recommended, but it can also work backwards, that you set a period of, a set fund, and then you figure out the criteria that work just with those funds. So the 35,000 here was an estimate out of one approach, but it could be handled in many different ways. And so if, to kind of put it into context, I think we spend about $150,000 a year on our match to the homeowners tax credit program. And the rental. Which is a lot more people. Well, we don't know what your program is going to be. And so so I'm just giving you it could be something that's very targeted with $20,000, or it could be, 50, or it could be 150. So I think a lot of it has to do with, you can put a set figure in here and then work, and come back to it if you need to adjust the number. I mean, I think I believe this is more a placeholder.
I'll just say that I got the number by, as the mayor said, by looking at one particular approach that we could implement right now, because I wanted to kickstart this. That might not be the best approach, as I've discovered talking with all of you, and we might want to take a little more time and find what's the best approach. So I'm not as concerned about the number as I am about the commitment to focus on this in the next little bit, so that we can, if possible, we can address it for this budget year, and if not, for sure, get it set up for future years.
I have Councilwoman Searcy.
So I was going to ask a question about sustainability, but since we're switching over.
Oh,
No problem. So to just chat a little bit about the tax credits, I agree with Councilmember Dabala in that this is something important for us to establish. My concern is making sure that we do it the right way. Often with things like tax credits, the benefit is when you have criteria that is consistent over time, and it makes it a little easier for people to know what they're eligible for. It makes it a little easier for us to figure out how much money we're talking about and to anticipate how much money we're talking about over time. I also wonder, I personally would love to see if we could come up with a criteria that is broader than that of the county. I think the county criteria can be quite limited, and although you may have a lot of long-term residents in the city of Tacoma Park that definitely would need some sort of tax relief, the current criteria that's in place, they wouldn't be eligible as well. And so I would be amendable to committing as a council that we would take an approach of having a work session, perhaps issuing a resolution stating our commitment to identifying potential tax credit programs that could help our long-time residents to alleviate some of the tax burden that they are experiencing, and then work with staff to identify potential criteria and the impacts or the cost impacts of those, and then voting on those so that the next budget cycle we kind of know upfront how much money we need to try to set aside. And that's just my 2 cents on the credit thing. In terms of the sustainability contract budget, I just want to make sure I understand that we will in fact be able to spend the extra $15K. It seemed as if this was something that kind of was a little left over in years prior. Given where we are with a contract, by the time we get something planned and ready to roll, we may be talking about the next budget. So I'm just trying to make sure I understand whether or not the 15K could be spent.
Yeah, it is unknown at this time. It really depends on how easily we can move into implementation relative to the recommendations that we have coming out of our next round of reports. If we start moving towards things like minimum energy standards, it probably has more of a legislative and code-related thing, so it takes a while to get those into place before we could actually kick off a program to move those forward. So it really is unclear. I would feel uncomfortable saying, oh yeah, we could absolutely spend the dollars. I know we could spend the intern hours for sure, and it really will depend on how easily transferable those recommendations are into actions.
Great. Councilmember Kovar?
Thank you. Switching back to the
Tax
tax credits again. Number one, I appreciate that Councilmember Duval has emphasized this as she has, and I think it's something that it does make sense to look at, especially with the changes at the federal level. I think it's nice to be able to focus on criteria that relate to longevity in the city, but I think Councilmember Searcy also suggested, I'm not sure that's the thing that we want to zero in on. I mean, I do respect that people have been here a long time, but to me, the length of time is less significant than maybe either an income-based thing or some other aspect of it where the hardship is really there. If it turns out that many of the people are seniors who, maybe are in empty nest situations or on fixed incomes, who are having difficulties being able to afford to stay here, that certainly is a group that I think it makes sense to try to target. But I feel like at this point, I'm not at all upset that we have the 150 devoted to matching what the county does, but this additional one, which is focused more on longevity without the income piece, I'm just not sure that's where we want to be. And to me, I'm reluctant to say, let's set aside this chunk of money and maybe we'll figure it out. When would we have to figure it out by if we were going to do something in order for that to be able to happen? Is that something you can respond to?
So there's two different ways to do it. The simplest way is just before the next budget, and have it as a rebate, and then we can send checks. That's how we do the homeowners one. It does not show up as a credit on a tax bill. So that's the simplest way.
I'm sorry, can I just ask, though, if we're going to do that, when would we have to know by? I mean, we would want people to know before they had to pay their tax bill in September so that they understood they were getting it, I suppose, or?
It depends on if you have something that people have to apply for or that we just give. I mean, there may be criteria that we can get objectively from land records or other processes that don't require an application process. And if so, that would be a lot less work. So, there may be people who already qualify for another thing that makes sense.
Yeah.
So there's that. If it's something where we need to advertise it and whatever, then I think we're talking by January in general, so that there's time. I mean, that's kind of when people are starting to think about it anyway for the next round of taxes.
But that would be really for next year.
Right, so I think, it's, to me, it really depends on your criteria and the ease of if you do an application process or not. I mean, the thing that's great about the homeowners one is we get a list from the state of who the people are that get it, and then it still takes some processing time. It's not a simple process.
But there's no independent review required.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I don't have a standard answer on that one.
Okay.
All right. Seeing no other questions or lights on, did you want to say one more thing, Councilmember?
No, that's
Okay. All right. So we'll look at the sustainability items first. The first one was adding back into the budget the $15,000 to the sustainability budget. All those in favor of that addition on our reconciliation item, our reconciliation list, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, that gets in. The next is increasing hours for sustainability intern. And that would be 8,120 added to the budget. All those in favor of the intern, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that is in. And so then the last thing to look at is whether or not we want to set aside any money for tax credits. Councilwoman DeBala.
Yeah, so I'm the one that started this,
Mhm.
and I'm fine to, I think it makes sense to dedicate ourselves to doing this, and I don't think it makes a lot of difference if we have 35,000 or 70,000 or 20,000 or 50 cents, because they're all arbitrary numbers at this point, so that's my view. I don't think, I'm not attached to 35,000. I'm attached to the idea that we're gonna move ahead with this.
So
Would-
we could zero it out.
Do you want us to zero it out, or would you like to have
I
some
would look
amount?
to the guidance from the city manager. If we zero it out, does that have some kind of implication that I'm not aware of?
If it's zeroed out and you want to go forward with something, then you would need to allocate, do a budget amendment for whatever that amount is that you want. If you pick a different amount, if you put an amount in here and you want a criteria that comes out to a different amount, you'd still have to do a budget amendment to do that. So then but if you exactly want whatever number it is you put, then
Yeah.
you don't have to come
Yeah.
back for a budget amendment.
But, may I?
Go ahead,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
But if there's money in there, it is more likely there will be money to spend on it when the time comes and the council makes a decision on how the program should work. If we have no money in there now, then it would be, can we find the money later to implement the program?
Having money in there makes it more likely that you will spend the money on something. But it really is up to the council about how you move forward, so.
I just
It's-
wanna say,
It's your resolve.
Okay, I have lights on, so I'm gonna
Oh,
go in order. I'm gonna resume some order here. Councilwoman Searcy?
So, again, for me, it's the criteria. And, reach an agreement and consensus amongst the council in terms of the criteria, the eligibility criteria. So in terms of thinking through some of the various options of eligibility and the total cost. So let's say we wanted an application process, and let's say we wanted some income eligibility, and that would require paperwork that people would need to submit, and it would just be a little bit more, it would be a lot more effort on behalf of staff. Those additional costs we would need to account for, right? In
That's right.
addition to trying to get a better feel for which residents in the city would be potentially eligible to apply. Not saying that they would, but they would be eligible to apply.
Right, there would be an administration cost, there certainly was staff time, but also, particularly if there's applications, there's the advertising, the getting the, sending out the forms and setting up whatever is needed for that. The one thing that hasn't been mentioned here is that the county has a lot of tax credits, but they're restricted in ways that I think hurt a lot of our residents. They have too small of, if you're a veteran and your property's over $500,000, you don't get that military credit. So there's a variety of things where if the county were lobbied to change its, to broaden its criteria, then the county could take care of it, and frankly, that would be great, because 2/3 of the tax bill is the county's. So, that would help our residents more. So, yes, depending on if it's an application process or an administration cost, and there may be some other ways that we can help broaden the number of recipients that could get this. Especially, I advocate very strongly that this be income-based. I really don't think that just because somebody's lived here a long time, they necessarily need or should get a credit. We work really hard on the sustainability items, for example, to ensure that many people get funds to help improve their homes so that they don't spend as much on energy. Again, most of those are income, have income qualifications, and so I feel good about that, but that's, I would urge that if you're doing some kind of a tax credit program, that be the kind of thing that you look at, that income qualification.
Right. And so I guess this next question is for the mayor. I know that we talked about the importance of trying to have an earmark in this budget, but given my experience thinking through these kinds of things, this kind of stuff can take a while to figure out in terms of what criteria we would ideally want, trying to anticipate how much it might cost down the line, and then ultimately trying to work it into a budget. Is it possible that we could, and I don't want to speak for Councilmember DeBala, but set the stage for perhaps next budget cycle, having a very clear idea of what the qualification, what the eligibility criteria for this credit would be, what potential dollar amount, we would have some time to work up some estimates, and then that way we could include in a budget something that's a little bit more in line with what, you know, folks around here deem as important criteria for such credits. We would have opportunities to lobby or talk to the county around certain credits, get a feel for their criteria. I just wonder if this might be, we're doing something, it's great, and I want to do something, but I'm just a little concerned that we may be putting the cart before the horse on this one right now.
I have been thinking about this. It's not exactly analogous, but last year when we did away with the inventory tax, and we said, okay, and then we want to really do a deep dive into commercial property taxes and looking at that. And so I think moving forward, what we are saying this year is we want a commitment to really looking at what tax credit program we may want to implement into the city. So then I'd look to the staff over the next couple of months to time out basically when we can then, you know, understand what data we have available, what may be available by request, and then do a deep dive for us. And have a similar process to what we did examining the commercial property tax. Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you. Sometimes it's confusing to know which is the cart and which is the horse. We're talking about increasing taxes and concerned that there are going to be some residents in the city who are adversely affected by those increases and unable to continue to live in their homes here in the city. I would argue that that is the cart we're getting before the horse. The horse is we need to protect those residents, and I think it's a better approach to go ahead and make a commitment that we're going to have money available for them, for some of them, before they have to pay taxes next year. And it behooves us then to develop the criteria. Again, I would certainly agree that you want it to be income-based because you want to help the people who really need the money. And although we don't know what that is, and we know it's going to take us some effort to get there, that by putting money in this fund, then we're making a commitment to actually get it done so that it can be used to offset those expenses this year that they're not going to be able to afford. So I encourage my colleagues to support voting for the $35,000 as an amount for this year. Thank you.
Councilman Costick.
Thank you. I want to thank Councilmember DeBala for bringing this up. I think it's really important, and I agree with Councilmember Siemens' comments that this is an area we really need to target, because as we're looking at this tax rate and what we're going to make it, the main reason we're concerned about what that tax rate is because we don't want it to negatively impact our lowest income residents and the people who are struggling the most. I also agree that this has to be or should be income-based rather than longevity-based or age-based. For the purpose of not at this point in time knowing exactly what we're going to be able to put into place, I would support a $22,500 500 rate, just so we keep our tax rate low for everyone, not knowing exactly what we're going to be able to achieve. For specific people, I'd like to try to set it at that constant yield plus employment cost index. So I'd rather have the lower number, but I feel really strongly that we should not zero this out. If this is something that we're committed to doing, we shouldn't just get rid of this in the budget and then say, hey, we have a lower tax rate. That's great. We need to put some funds into this line if this is something we want to do.
Councilmember Kovar.
Yeah, I think my colleagues have the best of motives in what they're talking about, but I really don't think it makes sense to say, we don't know what this is going to be. We're going to set some money aside. Maybe we'll never even have a majority who favors it, and who knows what we'll end up doing. You know, we didn't just sort of somehow raise taxes. We all just decided to raise taxes. And so I think to add to that further in a way where we don't even know what it is, we wouldn't do that for any other type of program. And I think it's just a mistake for us to do this. Now, I'm fine saying we should have one or more work sessions to look into it and to try to develop something, but the number of people we potentially help in a way that we're not even sure how we would help them, we've already raised everybody's taxes by what we're doing here today. I think doing this without knowing what it would be is just a mistake.
Councilwoman Devala.
Oh, I'm sorry, my
Oh,
light's
that's
just
okay.
on.
Councilmember Smith.
First, I'd like to say that I do support Councilmember Dabala's idea of providing residents with some type of tax relief. In previous years, people have asked councils to give them some type of credits, and it's really tough when we can't do that, and when we are in the budget process and we have to increase people's property taxes. But I would also like to say that I think we should be a little more generous when it comes to an income requirement for this future credit, because there are a lot of people that live in the city that at one time were federal employees, and they may not be poor, but at the same time they're not rich. So I mean, it is tough when you're on a fixed income. Any money that we ask for them for property taxes, income taxes, and all the other fees that they have to pay, they got to figure out how they have to reduce their budget. So I think it is very important that we find a way that we can make this available for people as soon as possible, and we put a number in the budget. That number may change, but it is important that there's some money in there, because in previous councils, when we didn't have a number, it was hard to get that program or initiative off the ground. Thank you.
Do you want to speak again?
If I may.
Go ahead.
Just very quickly, as I recall, we talked about adding money into sidewalks based on the fact that, yes, we can spend it, but without a specific list on exactly how it was going to be spent. And so I would say this is the equivalent. We know that it can be spent. We just don't know exactly what the criteria is at this time.
If I can just add.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask if, when we do vote on this, that we have some specific language in it, like funding for supplemental tax credits for low and moderate income residents or something like that. So it doesn't go into the budget as just supplemental tax credits, but something that specifies sort of our intent, if that's possible.
Certainly, we can have the language, and I think, I think income-based is correct, because then I think it can also address Councilmember Smith's concern that it doesn't necessarily have to be, unless you decide this, something that meets like HUD's definition of low and moderate income. It could be a different kind of income base that you jointly decide on.
Great. Councilwoman Devala, do you have something else?
Yeah, just to say again that this specific number was because I took the county criteria thinking that it might save some staff time, it might, my interest all along is in the lower and low moderate, whatever you want to call it, income folks who need the help and less in the longevity. My second thing I want to say is I would hope we could try to do it for this coming budget year. However, I'm not, unlike some of the other things that we've discussed tonight, I'm less optimistic that we're gonna make it, but I would like to see if we can.
I agree.
Great. So, with that, if Councilman DeBala is fine with it, I'd like to propose that we put in there as a placeholder the 22,500 as we're moving forward on the reconciliation list. Does that go with you? Okay, good. So then the item is funding for supplemental tax credits that would be income-based for 22,500. All those in favor, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. That's in the budget.
Thank you.
And- Thank you. And looking at the work we did this evening on our reconciliation items, and if all the spreadsheet worked correctly, it would take us to the tax rate for constant yield plus the employment cost index for this year. If folks want to take just a moment and look over the list and see if there's anything else anyone wants to raise tonight. On Wednesday evening, we did tentatively schedule a work session time on the budget reconciliation, but if we don't need it, we don't need it. So,
24 hours
yeah, if you want to process it and think about it. All right, well, seeing no lights, I think this was some excellent work this evening. Thank you to everyone. Thank you very much to the staff who were here, and for those of you whose your budgets we did not touch tonight, congratulations. And thank you.
They were all touched.
I know. And thank you very much, particularly to those departments that we did have a lot of questions for. We very much appreciate it. And to our city manager and deputy city manager for all the work on this, and our finance director. Thank you very, very much. All right, and we're adjourned for the evening.